I'm not actually, I'm not like doing this kind of online sessions, but what to do, I have to do it. So, uh, last last week, I started the deductions. Deductions are relevant to the business income and investment income. I think you can remember for the employment, there are no deductions. So to calculate assessable income, we can deduct some expenses. Those expenses are provided under section 10 to section 19. So I started from here. Deductions, these are the expenses allowable for business income and investment income. So I have divided these deductions into three parts. That is, first one is general deductions under section 10, then main deduction under section 11, and specific deductions from section 12 to 19. Then I explained about the general rule, that means under section 10. So under general rule, the employment income, for the employment income, we can't do deductions. We can't deduct any expense. And some deductions are not allowable in calculating person's income under section 10(1)(b). I will explain it later. Actually, this is just a reminder. I explained these uh, provisions earlier. Then the withholding tax, if withholding tax was not deducted, then that is not an expenditure entitled for the deduction. Then some expenses are not allowable as a deduction. And if that act is this act not provided, that is that kind of expenses are not allowable as a deduction. Then if we have provided a specific deduction rule, then we have to deduct that kind of expense from that under according to that provision. That means specific deductions means from section uh, 12 to 19. From section 12 to 19, we have specific deductions. So if we have an expense relevant to these specific deductions, then we have to refer the deduction provision uh, provided from section 12 to 19. We can't deduct that expenditure under main deduction rule. So this is just a reminder. Then the domestic expenses mm, can be, these are the actually domestic expenses cannot be deducted, and tax payable under this tax, that is income tax and others. So section 197 I can explain later. Then the interest, penalties and fines payable in relation to breach of any written law, that is also not deductible. Then the expenditure or any other deduction relevant for the exempt amounts and final withholding payments, that is also not allowable to deduct. So I have mentioned some words in another color, that is in purple. That is an amendment made in the Inland Revenue 2022 Act. And the retirement contributions, this also we have included this gratuity word here. There is an amendment. This is also an amendment done through the Act number 2021, year 2021. Then the dividends of a company, that is also an expenditure that cannot be deducted. Okay, can you help me, someone to remind me the point that I stopped last week? I think I did up to, actually all of you are muted. So if you can please uh, let me know in the chat box up to what point I stopped. පොඩ්ඩක් මට මතක් කරන්න කවුරු එක්කෙනෙක් මට මතක හැටියට මම මේ හරියට වෙනකන් කරා කියලා. නැත්නම් අපි මේ ටික දිගටම කරගෙන යමු. කාට හරි පුළුවන්ද මට චුට්ටක් මතක් කරන්න? දමින්ද මතක නැන්ද කාටවත්? So if you can't remember, I'll do, yes, there's a chat box. We discuss up to domestic expenses. Very good, very good. Maliti, thank you. So we discussed up to domestic expenses. That means up to here. Okay. Up to this part, I think you don't have an issue. If you have an issue, you can ask me, and I can start from here. This is domestic expenses. So domestic expenses are provided under section 197. Under this domestic expenses, we have three parts. First one is an individual incurs expenditure in respect of himself. That means an expenditure. In this case, if a person incurs an expenditure in respect of himself, that kind of expenses are not allowed as a deduction. For that part, we have a specific provision, that is section 197, subsection 1. Under 197, subsection 1, this is that part where an individual incurs expenditure in respect of himself. So if an expenditure incurred by any person in respect of himself, that is not allowed as a deduction. Okay, what are the expenses that they can incur for himself? What kind of expenses? Okay, all are mute now. If you can unmute and answer me. So these are the expenses that a person can incur in respect of himself. So these kind of expenses are not allowed as a deduction. So what are the expenses incur in respect of them himself? Himself means if I am a taxpayer, if I incur expenditure in respect of myself, when I am calculating my personal income tax, I can't deduct this kind of expenses. That is the point of this provision. So, in maintaining the individual, including in providing shelter as well as meals, refreshment, entertainment, or other leisure activities. That means if we incur expenditure for our shelter, that means if we are constructing our house, we can't deduct that expenditure when we are calculating our income tax payable amount, and as well as meals, refreshment, entertainment, or any other leisure activities. That kind of expenses we incur during the year of assessment cannot be deducted as an expenditure. The next one is in the individual commuting from home. That means commuting from home. That means the expenses we incur for traveling. That kind of expenses are also not allowed as a deduction. The next one is in acquiring clothing, including shoes for the individual. Other than clothing that is not suitable for wearing outside of work. What are the clothes that we cannot use up for outside? Okay. It is better to mute your mic. Who is this? It's better to mute your mic. And if you have questions, you can unmute and ask the question. So we have some expenses that we incur for our clothing. That kind of expenses are not allowable as a deduction, but there may be some clothing that we cannot wear outside of the work. That kind of expenses can be deducted. So what is the, give me an example for that kind of wear clothing. Actually, that is a uniform. If we use some uniforms, if we incur some expenditure for purchase a uniform, we can deduct that if that uniform is not suitable to wear outside. I think මම ඔකට මතක ඇති මම කිව්වා uniforms normally Navaloka hospital. Some ladies wear a sari for their uniform as their uniform, but that lady can wear that sari for the outside of their work. So that kind of uniforms are not allowable as a deduction, but the uniform that cannot wear outside can be allowed as a deduction. The next one is in educating the individual. Educating the individual. So other than education that is directly relevant to a business conducted by the individual and that does not lead to a degree or diploma. That means if that education is definitely required for their service, their business activities, then that kind of education expenses can be deducted. But other expenses are not allowable as a deduction, specifically if we incur expenditure for obtain a degree or a diploma. So that kind of expenses are not allowable as a deduction. The next one is in paying any personal debts, including credit card debts of the individual. That means we can obtain a loan facility from a bank or from any other person. And if we pay that loan balance, and if we that kind of loan balances or loan payments, repayments are also not allowable as a deduction. These are the items, these are the expenses that we can incur ourselves. So this kind of expenses are not allowable as a deduction. Then the next part 2 is the category, second category is we can incur expenses not on behalf of us, but for another individual. That kind of expenses are also not allowable as a deduction, but to the extent that the recipient, the benefit taker, if that beneficiary declare or that benefit in their personal income tax matters, then that kind of expenses can be deducted as an expenditure in calculating the payer's tax liability. That means, for an example, sometimes we give some directors a benefit, housing benefit or some other benefits. So if the company or a person who is a tax person, that person can deduct that kind of expenses only the benefit receiver. That means that director declares that benefit in calculating that director's tax liability. ඒ කියන්නේ දැන් මම කම්පැනි එකක් නම් හරි මම කවුරු බිස්නස් කරන කෙනෙක් නම් හරි මම පේමන්ට් එකක් කරනවා to any other person. Here where another person incurs expenditure in making a payment to or providing any other benefit for an individual. That means we are incurring expenditure not in respect of themselves but to others. එතකොට වෙන කෙනෙක් වෙනුවෙන් තමයි මම මේ වියදම දරන්නේ. So මේ වගේ වෙලාවකට මම දරන මේ වියදම I can deduct only the situations. මට මේක වියදමක් විදිහට අඩු කරන්න පුළුවන් වෙන එකම අවස්ථාව තමයි මම දරන වියදම ලබන කෙනාගේ අතේදී ආදායමක් බවට පත් වෙනවා නම්. That is why I have given you that explanation, that example. If I am a company, if I have a director and I can pay housing benefit. I can grant housing benefit to that director. I think you can remember we calculated director's tax liability. ඔයාලට මතකයිනේ අපි විභාගෙටත් ගානක් හැදුවා. ඒකෙදි අපි කිව්වා කම්පැනි එකක් ඩිරෙක්ටර් කෙනෙකුට දෙනවා මොකක් හරි වෙහිකල් එකක් දෙන්න. එහෙමත් නැත්නම් ඩිරෙක්ටර් කෙනෙකුට හරි කවුරු හරි කෙනෙකුට තමන්ගේ සමාගමෙන් තමන්ගේ සේවකයෙකුට පේමන්ට් එකක් කරනවා. සමහර වෙලාවට හවුසින් බෙනිෆිට් එකක් දෙනවා. එහෙමත් නැත්නම් මොනවා හෝ වෙන බෙනිෆිට් එකක් දෙනවා. එතකොට මේ කම්පැනි එක දෙන බෙනිෆිට් එක අනිත් පැත්තෙන් ලබන කෙනා, ඒ ලබන සේවකයා එයාගේ ඉන්කම් ටැක්ස් පර්පස් එකට ගත්තනම් විතරයි මේ පේමන්ට් එක කරන කෙනාට වියදමක් විදිහට ඒක අඩු කරන්න පුළුවන්. ඒක තමයි මෙතනින් මේ කියන්නේ. ඒ වගේ අවස්ථාවලදී විතරයි. Here, the payment or benefit shall be included in calculating the income of the individual. If they declare that benefit as that another person's income, then that kind of expenses can be deducted. Then the next one is the individual provides consideration of an equal market value of the payment or benefit, or the amount of the expenditure is so small as to make it unreasonable or administratively impracticable to account for it. Sometimes we give something to our employees, but it is not practical or it is unreasonable to consider as an expenditure of that company. What is the most suitable example for this? Sometimes you may receive some benefit from your company, but it is too small to consider as that benefit as your income. මොනවාද ඔයගලන්ට හම්බෙන්නේ? ඔයගලන්ගේ ආයතනවල normally they provide you a tea. තේ එකක් දෙනවනේ. මේ තේ එක ඔයගලන්ට ලැබෙන benefit එකක්. You know, it is not reasonable. අපිට ඒක account කරන එක reasonable නෑ සමහර වෙලාවට. ඉතාමත්ම පුංචි වටිනාකමක් තියෙන තේ එකක. මේ තේ කෝප්පේ වටිනාකම වැඩි කරලා අරගෙන එතකොට දැන් මේකත් මේ වගේමයි. මේ කම්පැනි එක එක්කෙනෙක් වෙනත් කෙනෙකු වෙනුවෙන් වියදමක් දරනවා. අන්න ඒ වියදම ගැන තමයි මේ කතා කරන්නේ. At that time we can disallow if it is practical. If it is reasonable or administratively practical, then we can disallow it, but in other cases we can allow that part. We have three situations. One is if the recipient declare that income as that person, that individual's benefit, or if it is if they consider the equal market value of the payment, or if it is too small or it is not reasonable to consider for the income tax purposes, then only we can allow as a deduction. Other cases, we are not going to allow this kind of expenses for the deduction. ඒක පැහැදිලි ඇති නේද? අපැහැදිලි කවුරු හරි ඉන්නවා නම් මගෙන් ආයෙ අහන්න පුළුවන්. ඔයගොල්ලෝ ඔක්කොම මියුට් වෙලා ඉන්නේ. ඒ උනාට අන්මියුට් කරලා කාට හරි ප්‍රශ්නයක් තියෙනවා නම් මගෙන් අහන්න පුළුවන්. ක්ලාස් එකේ වගේම තමයි වෙනසක් නැහැ. Okay. This part is very important because when you are calculating your tax liability of a company or a person or an individual, then you should have better knowledge about these deductions. Therefore, if you have a question, you can ask now. මොකද මේ පාඩ එක මට ඇත්තටම ඔයගලන්ට ඕනේ ක්ලාස් එකේදී physically කරන්න. එච්චරම වැදගත් මේ පාඩ එක. But unfortunately, I have to do it today. ඒකට අදම කරන්න උනා. එතනට තමයි අපි ගාන්ට වැටුනේ. So I think තියෙන විදියට කරමු. Okay. If you have any question regarding this part, you can ask. Then the third one is The expenditure referred to in about 2 slides. That means expenditure referred to in these two. That means expenditure incurred in respect of himself or expenditure incur in respect of another individual for any other benefit for another person. If we incur expenditure after obtaining a loan facility, that means in respect of the borrowed money. That means we incur expenses using the borrowed money. We incurred expenses, which I have already explained, using the borrowed money. That means from our after obtaining a loan facility. So if that expenditure is not allowable, the interest expenditure we pay in respect of that kind of expenses for that borrowed money, that is also not allowable as a deduction. එක සරලවම කිව්වොත් අපි දැන් මම කතා කරා වියදම් ජාති දෙකක් ගැන. අපි වෙනුවෙන් දරන වියදම් සහ අපි වියදමක් දරනවා ඒක තව කෙනෙකුටයි බෙනිෆිට් එකක් වෙන්නේ. අන්න ඒ වගේ වියදම් ජාති දෙකක් කිව්වා. ඒ වියදම් වලදී කිව්වා මම මේ අවස්ථාවන් වලදී මේ වියදම් when we are calculating our business or investment income we can't deduct කියලා. එතකොට අපිට ඒක deduct කරන්න බැරි නම් ඒ වියදම දරන්න අපිට මුදල් නැත්නම් if we don't have enough money what we have to do we have to obtain a loan facility. එතකොට අපි කරන්නේ ණයක් අරගෙන ගෙවනවා. So the interest portion with regard to that loan is also a not deductible expenditure. එතකොට මෙතනින් කියන්නේ අපි ඒ වගේ interest එකක් ගෙවුවා නම් අපිට අර අඩු කරන්න ඉඩ නොදෙන જાතියේ වියදමක් වෙනුවෙන් දරපු ණයක් වෙනුවෙන් that interest also not allowable as a deduction. එතකොට මේ ටික හොඳට මතක තියාගන්න. Okay. Then I have explained you these three most important expenditures. So under section 191, you can refer these domestic expenses from section 197 of the Inland Revenue Act. So I have categorized these expenses into three. Actually, those expenses are already categorized in the Act. That is for subsection 1, subsection 2, and subsection 3. You can refer the Act and you can read carefully and you can understand that. එතකොට ඔයගලන්ට තවදුරටත් කියවලා තේරුම් ගන්න පුළුවන් මම මේ දැන් කියපු එක මොකක්ද කියලා. Okay. I have explained about section 10. The section 10 is for not deductible expenses. ඒ කියන්නේ අඩු කරන්න ඉඩ නොදෙන වියදම් ගැන තමයි section 10 වලින් කතා කරන්නේ. So, in that section, I said lot of expenses that are not allowable as a deduction when we are calculating the business income or an investment income. Okay. So, what are the expenses that can be allowed as a deduction? There's a question. Yes. Please mark your attendance. Okay. The main deduction rule. So this is the main deduction rule. In section 100, under section 10, I explained about the expenses that are not allowed as a deduction. But under section 11, I will explain you the expenses that are allowable as a deduction. එතකොට මොගලන්ට තේරෙන විදිහට මම මොනවද මේ කියන්නේ කියලා. අපිට ලාභය අපි profit අපි taxable income එක ගණනය කරන්න කලින් what we have to do we can deduct expenses. Here I explain about this income part, then I explain about the excluded items and the exempt amounts, then the allowable expenses or losses. Now we are in this part, so we are going to calculate assessable income after deducting these expenses from the income. So for the employment income, we can't deduct any expenditure, but under business and investment income, we can deduct expenses. So under section 10, we can't deduct any expenditure, but under section 11, we can deduct expenses that are provided under section 11. This is the main deduction rule. So in this section, it says in calculating income from business or investment income, the following are deductible expenses to the extent they are incurred during the year. That means if we incurred an expenses that are relevant for the calculation, that are relevant for the incurring, producing this income, then that is allowable as a deduction. That means expenses to the extent they are incurred during the year of assessment and incurred in the production of income. That means we can deduct only the expenses if they are incurred during the year and that expenses are incurred in the production of income. මොකද්ද කියන්නේ? අපිට අඩු කරන්න බැරි වියදම් වෙනම කතා කරා. Under section 11, I am talking about the expenses that are allowable as a deduction. To be eligible the expenditure, there should be main two requirements. One is that expenditure should be incurred during that year of assessment. يعني මේ වර්ෂයේදී දරපු incurred කිව්වහම අපි සල්ලි දුන්නා විතරක් නෙමෙයි සල්ලි වලින් දෙන්න අදහස් කරගෙන ඉන්න ටිකත් අඩු කරන්න පුළුවන් because we are calculating an accrued basis. Therefore we can deduct expenditure relevant for that year of assessment. And means these two criteria should be fulfilled, not only one. අපි මෙතන කතා කරන්නේ මේ දෙක link කරන්නේ and වලින්. And means these two conditions should be fulfilled to deduct the expenditure when we are calculating the assessable income from business or investment. That means we can deduct the expenses incurred in the production of income during the year of assessment. එතකොට මේ තක්සේරු වර්ෂයේදී දරපු වියදමක් හැබැයි ඒ වියදම that expenditure should be incurred in the production of income. එතකොට we should have better knowledge about the expenses that we incurred in the production of that income. අපිට ඕන තරම් වියදම් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. නමුත් අපිට අඩු කරන්න දෙන්නේ ඒ වියදම ආදායම උපයන්න දරුවා නම් විතරයි. There may be some expenses, there may be a lot of expenses, but if that expenditure is not incurred in the production of income, then we can't deduct. And not only these two conditions, there is another one condition, that is the deduction shall not be allowed for an expense if it is a capital nature. If there is a capital nature expenditure, that kind of expenses are not allowable as a deduction. So what is the meaning of a capital nature expenditure? Capital nature expenditure means an expenditure that incurs, but the benefit of that expenditure goes not only for the 1 or 2 months or 1 or 2 days, but more than 12 months period. That kind of expenses we consider as capital nature expenditure. So that kind of expenses are not allowed as a deduction under section 11. එතන මොනවාද මේ capital nature expenditure කියන්නේ? If we purchase a table, if we purchase a machine, vehicle, the benefit of that purchase, that vehicle is not for the 1 month or 1 or 2 months or 1 day or 2 days. It is for the period more than 1 year, more than 12 months period. So we consider that kind of expenses are capital nature. So we can't deduct that kind of capital nature expenses under section 12. මේක පැහැදිලි නැත්නම් කවුරු හරි අහන්න පුළුවන්. And there is another most important thing. This is an amendment made in the year of in the 2021 Amendment Act. So this is an expenditure this is a cost of funds of the financial institutions. So this kind of expenditure is incurred as a loan that loan is provided for a new business commenced or no after April 1st, 2021 by any individual. That means after completion of the vocational education from any vocational education institution, they can start a new business. For the starting up of that kind of new business, financial institutions can provide loans. So that kind of loans are allowable as a deduction when we are calculating a financial institution's tax liability. So this is an amendment. Actually, this is an insertion from the Inland Revenue Amendment Act in the year 2021. So now I think you can understand that we can deduct expenditure under Section 11 only if that expenditure is in revenue nature. That means capital nature expenses are not allowable as a deduction under Section 11. Only the revenue nature expenditure can be allowed under Section 11. But there is a specific condition. The first one is that expenditure should be incurred in that year, and that expenditure should be incurred in the production of income. Then only we can deduct that kind of expenses. Okay. So what do you think? Do you think that we do not have expenses in capital nature in a company or a person? There are a lot of capital nature expenses. That kind of expenses should be incurred by the taxpayer, by a company or an individual. So we have another provisions to deduct that kind of capital nature expenses. We call them a specific deduction rules. So we have specific deduction provisions from section 12 to 19. From each these sections, some kind of capital nature expenses can be deducted. Not the all, but some. So under section 11, only revenue nature expenses can be deducted. And I think you can remember, I have already explained that if there is a specific deduction rule, that expenditure should be deducted under that specific rule. Here, where more than one deduction applies, the most specific deduction shall be applied even if that results in the denial of a deduction. අපිට අඩු කිරීම අඩු කරන්න බැරි වුණත් පුළුවන් වුණත් අපිට deductions අඩු කරන්න. deductions කියලා මෙතනදී අදහස් කරන්නේ වියදම්. මේ වියදම අඩු කරන්න අපිට ගන්න තියෙන වඩාත්ම specific suitable deduction rule එක apply කරන්න කියලා තමයි මෙතන කියන්නේ. Where more than one deduction applies. එතකොට එකකට වඩා වැඩි අඩු කිරීම අදාළ වෙනවා නම් ඒ අවස්ථාවලදී වඩාත්ම suitable වඩාත්ම ඒකටම අදාළ වෙන deduction rule එක apply කරන්න තමයි මෙන්න මෙතන section 10 වල මේ 4 වල කතා කරන්නේ. ඔයගලන්ට මතක ඇති මම මේ ගැන කිව්ව කලිනුත්. එතකොට now we have specific deduction rules. Under these specific deduction rules, we discuss specific expenses. We discuss about specific expenses. මේ බලන්නකො දැන් මෙතන interest එක. Here, allowance for trading stocks. Then, repair and improvement expenses. Then, research and development expenses and agricultural startup expenses. Here, marketing and communication expenditure. Then capital allowances and balancing allowances. After that, losses on realization of business assets and liabilities. Deductible amount of financial cost and the business or investment losses. These are the expenses can be deducted under these specific conditions, applying these specific deduction rules. So, අපිට දැන් මොකද්ද කියන්නේ? එකම වියදමකට if more than one deduction rule applies. ඒ කියන්නේ එක වියදමකට deduction rules දෙක තුනක් apply වෙනවා නම් what we have to do, we have to select most specific deduction rule to that kind of expenditure. Then we have to apply that provision in respect of that expenditure. හරි. කියමු උදාහරණයක් ගත්තොත් මෙතන මම කතා කළා if that expenditure is incurred in the production of income and incurred during that year that kind of expenses can be deducted කියලා. එතකොට මෙතනදී අපි කතා කරනවා ආදායම උපය ගන්න. දරපු ඕනෑම වියදමක් මෙතනින් අඩු කරන්න කියනවා capital nature වියදම් හැර. එතකොට මේක යටතේ ඕනෑම වියදමක් අඩු කරන්න පුළුවන් කියලා නේ අපිට තේරෙන්නේ. හැබැයි මෙතනට ගියාම කියනවා interest expense එකට අදාළ වෙන section 12 කියලා. එතකොට දැන් මොකද වෙලා තියෙන්නේ? දැන් more than one rules apply වෙනවා. එතකොට interest expense එක අපි දරන්නේ ආදායම උපයන්න නම් either we can deduct that interest expenses from under section 11 or under section 12. එතකොට මේ දෙකෙන් ඕන එකකින් අඩු කරන්න පුළුවන්. But under section 12, under section 11, we can't deduct interest expenses because we have a specific deduction rule under section 12. හරිද? මෙන්න මේක තමයි මේ කියන්නේ. Now here, for another example. If we incur repair and improvement expenses, actually if that repair and improvement expenses is incurred in the production of income, අපිට මේක යටතේ අඩු කරන්න හැකියාව තියෙනවා නේ? section 11 යටතේ මේක කියනවා. But we can apply section 11 and section 14. Yeah, more than one deduction rules can be applied. But this is the specific rule for repair and improvement expenditure. එතකොට අපිට කියන්න බෑ මෙතන මේ දරන repair හරි improvement හරි කියන වියදම මොනතරම් ආදායම උපයන්න අදාළ වුණත් මේ යටතේ we can't deduct that expenditure under section 11. What we have to do? We have to read section 14 and we have to apply section 14. According to that provision, we can deduct repair and improvement expenditure. මේ කොහොම යටතේ කතා කරන්නේ වියදම් වර්ග. මෙන්න මේ විදිහේ වියදමක් ආයතනයක් දරලා තිබුණොත් තමන්ගේ income එක ගණනය කරන්න what we have to do? We can deduct that expenditure under section 14, not under section 11. For another example, research and development expenses. Sometimes we incur expenses for the research and development of the company or an individual's business purposes. So what will happen? We can't deduct that expenditure under section 11, even though that expenditure is incurred in the production of income. What we have to do? We have to apply section 14, provisions under section 14 to check whether that R&D expenses or an agricultural startup expenses is allowable for the deduction or not. එතකොට මෙන්න මේ විදිහට මෙතන විශේෂයෙන් කියලා තියෙන දෙයක් අපි අඩු කරන්න යනවා නම් ඒ දේ අඩු කළ යුත්තේ මේ කියන වගන්තිවල තියෙන විධිවිධාන නිසා මෙතන කතා කරන්න පොදු විධිවිධානය අනුව නෙවෙයි. එතකොට ඔයගොල්ලෝ හොඳට මතක තියාගන්න ඕනේ. අපි කෙනෙකුගේ ව්‍යාපාර බිස්නස් ඉන්කම් එකකට අර මම මුලින් කිව්වා වගේ අපි අර මෙතන කතා කරන අපි මෙතනදී කතා කරනෝනේ employment එක we have already done. So now we are talking about the business income and investment income, assessable income of business income and investment income. When we are calculating the assessable income of business or an investment income, we are going to deduct some expenses. So to deduct that expenses, we should know the rules for the deduction. එතකොට මෙන්න මේ අඩු කිරීමට අපිට නීති ටික දැනගන්න ඕන. මේ නීතියේ හැටියට විතරයි මේ වියදම් අඩු කරන්න පුළුවන්. That is why I told you that we cannot deduct expenses mentioned in the audited statement accounts. So when they are calculating their book profit or book profit for the consideration of their profit, for income tax purposes, we cannot consider that book profit for income tax purposes what we have to do? We have to consider whether those expenses and income are allowable under Inland Revenue Act or not. Only the income and the expenses should be according to the Inland Revenue Act provisions. එතකොට ආදායම් බදු පනතේ තියෙන විදිහට තමයි ආදායම ගන්නත් ඕනේ. ආදායම් බදු පනතේ කියන විදිහට තමයි වියදම් අඩු කරන්නත් ඕනේ. ඒතර අපිට මොනතරම් audited accounts තිබුණත් publish කරපු accounts තිබුණත් ඔයගොල්ලෝ දැකලා තියෙනවනේ annual reports publish කරනවා. මේ හැම එකකම ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ profit එක මෙච්චරයි කියලා හදලා තියෙනවා. දැකලා ඇතිනේ ඔයගොල්ලෝ ඕන තරම් ඔයගොල්ලන්ගේ companies වලට ඒවා තියෙනවා. හැබැයි ඒගොල්ලෝ හදන profit එක නෙවෙයි අපේ බදු වලට අදාළ වෙන profit එක වෙන්නේ. අපේ profit එක කියන්නේ එහෙම පිටින්ම වෙනස් විදියකට අපි calculate කරනවා based on the provisions of the Inland Revenue Act. ඒතර දැන් අපි මොකද මේ කරන්නේ? මෙන්න මේ වගන්ති යටතේ කතා කරන්නේ කොහොමද මේ අඩු කරන්න දෙන වියදම අඩු කරන්න දෙන්නේ කියන එක තමයි අපි දැන් මේ බලන්නේ. මේක බලලා මේ විදිහට එකින් එකට වියදම් අඩු කරගෙන යන්න පුළුවන්. business or investment එකේ accessible income එක ගණනය කරන්න. Okay. Let's move to the next slide. This is a slide with regard to the interest income, interest expenses. This is regarding the section 12. So section 12 is applicable for rent interest expenses. Okay. In this provision, for the purpose of section 11, the interest incurred under debt obligation shall be deemed to be incurred in the production of income to the extent So the interest incurred under debt obligation shall be deemed to be incurred in the production of income to the extent. That means for this purpose, for section 12 purposes, we consider the interest expenditure. Interest expenditure means the amount we pay under debt obligation. අපි ණයක් ගත්තොත් ඒ ණය ගෙවන පොලිය. This is an expense. Api deposit. This is not an interest income. We received in respect of our cash, our bank deposits. අතරම මෙතනින් කතා කරන්නේ වියදම් ගැන. අපි ණයක් ගත්තොත් ඒ ණයට ගෙවන පොලිය තමයි අපි දැන් මේ අඩු කරන්න යන්නේ. If we have an expenditure like interest, so we have to refer section 12 and we have to check whether that total interest payment relevant for that year of assessment is deductible or not. Under section 12, it says that deduction. What happened to this? Oh, මේ number මේවා අමතක කරන්න මේ cut and paste එකක් ගන්නකොට සමහරවිට මෙතන මේ number 4 කියලා වැරලා තියෙනවා. It is not number 4. A and B. It should be A and B. So the borrowed money was, a person can borrow money from a financial institution or from somewhere, and that borrowed money used to acquire an asset that is used during the year in the production of income. That kind of, if we use that asset for the production of income, then the money we use to asset, the money we use to purchase that asset is that borrowed money. Then the interest we pay in respect of that borrowed money, that is deductible under section 12. Or we can use that borrowed money as it is for the we can incur in the production of income. That means we can borrow money. Either we can use that borrowed money for the production of income. අපිට සල්ලි වල බැංකුවෙන් ණයක් අරගෙන ඒ ණය ටික හැමම බැංකුවට දාලා ණයක් බැංකුවෙන් අරගෙන ඒ ණය පාවිච්චි කරන්න පුළුවන් අපේ for the production of income. අපේ business එකට පාවිච්චි කරන්න පුළුවන්. Or we can use that borrowed money to purchase an asset. And if that asset is used for the production of income, ඒ කියන්නේ අපි කරන්නේ මොකද? අපි loan එකක් අරන් machine එකක් ගන්න. මේ machine එක පාවිච්චි කරනවා අපේ ව්‍යාපාරයට for the production of income. Then the interest pay in respect of that borrowed money is a deductible expenditure. ඒක තමයි මේ section 12 වලින් කියන්නේ. But actually there is a restriction to companies. So normally we apply section 12 for an individuals and for a partnerships. If we are calculating an individuals or partnerships tax calculation, at that time, if they have incurred interest expenses, then we refer section 12. But in the case of a company, if they pay interest, at that time we use not section 12 but section 18, because it says the most suitable provision should be applied for an expenditure. Therefore, for a company, we have to refer section 18 to check whether that interest expenditure is allowable as a deduction or not. But for an individual or a company, we can use section 12. Okay, this is an example for this kind of interest expenses. In this example, Dr. Sanjeevani runs a dental clinic. For the year of assessment 21-22, she borrows funds from Bank A. In the same year of assessment, she uses some of the funds to purchase a new dental shop. She also uses some of the funds to pay the rent on the premises she runs her clinic. The remainder of the funds she uses to pay for her child's admission fees for school. Mrs. Sanjeevani pays interest on the loan. Now you can understand what I am talking about. Read this example carefully and tell me what are the expenses that can be deducted under section 12. You can unmute the mics and you can answer. සද්දයක්වත් නැනේ. හරිම කම්මැලි අද නම් ක්ලාස් එක. කවුරුත් නැද්ද මට උත්තරයක් දෙන්න?
Madam, first two can be deducted because it's business related. But the third, it's not business related.
Yeah.
So in that case, madam, now isn't it? Don't we have to consider the proportion of the fund that she uses for the business and the
personal use? Yes. Yes. This
great, if it is
yes.
Great, if the greater proportion is used for business, then yes. If not, madam, is there a problem? Because now if she uses greater proportion to personal usage, then she can't claim, no, sir, madam, the interest.
Yes, actually, we have to apportion the interest into personal use and business use. So we know the amounts that doctor uses for new dental chair, and for that she knows the amounts. According to that amount, she has to apportion those expenses, and in respect of that, according to that apportion, she has to calculate the interest for that each business. So in this case, purchase of new chair, that is a chair that is uses in running her business. that is not allowable under section 11, but deductible under section 12. Yes, you are very correct. And the rent, that is on premises, she runs her clinic. So funds are used in the production of income from the business, but it is not allowable under section 11, but it is deductible under section 12. You know why? Because we have most relevant section for the interest, that is section 12. Therefore, we have to go to section 12. And the last one is that is a personal use. So this kind of personal uses are not allowable as a deduction. Therefore, we have to calculate it proportionately. එතකොට අපි දන්නවා loan value එක. මේ loan value එකකින් අපි වෙනම බලනවා මේ loan එකේ මේකට කොච්චරද මේකට කොච්චරද මේකට කොච්චරද. We can allow these expenditure incurred for these two, first one and two. For the last one, that proportionate amount is disallowable. එතකොට අපි ඒක කරනවා. Okay, there's only 1 and 2. Yes, Malik, that is good. Oh, yes. Only 1 and 2 is allowable as a deduction. That means interest portion. The balance interest portion is not allowable as a deduction. Okay. Now I have a question. Now I said that if in this case, I told you that if in this case, she borrowed money from a financial institution and used to acquire an asset and incur some expenses. So what happened if she sold this asset? What happened? What is the tax? What would be the tax treatment for that interest portion? Suppose in the year of assessment 21-22, she purchased this asset. And when she is making the interest payment, we can allow that interest as a deduction. But in the year of assessment 22-23, she can sell this. So, but the loan is still there. If she is not secured this one, it is still there. So she has to pay interest for the year of assessment 22-23, but that asset is not with us. We have already sold it. So what would be the tax treatment? Can she deduct that interest expenses for the year of assessment 22-23? Can she deduct it? පුළුවන් දෙයට අඩු කරන්න. මතකයිනේ මං කිව්වා. asset එකක් ගත්තා. එක්ක asset එකක් purchase කරලා ඒ asset එක use කරන්න ඕනේ business. එහෙම නැත්නම් මොකද කරන්න ඕනේ? එයා ණයට ගත්තු ණය ටික එහෙම පිටින්ම යොදවන්න ඕනේ එයාගේ business එකට හෝ investment එකට. Then only she can deduct interest. Hari. Now she bought an asset and she sold it. In the year of assessment, she did not use that share in the year of assessment 22-23, but she paid interest. Can she deduct that interest? මොකද කියන්නේ?
No, madam.
No. හැමෝම කියන්නේ noද?
No.
හැමෝම කියන්නේ noද? අනිත් අය මොකද කියන්නේ?
No, madam.
No. තව?
Madam, but now we'll say now though she has sold it, whatever the funds, if she uses again in the business,
Yes, very good. Yeah, very good.
is also-
That is the answer I wanted from you. Actually, it says like this. She can either purchase an asset and use that asset to the business for the business, or she can use that debt obligation for incurring she can incur that obligation in the production of income. එතකොට යාට asset එක විතරක් නෙවෙයි. She can use that money, that debt obligation in the production of income. Suppose she incurred that in the production of income, then it is deductible. Suppose she used that sold money to purchase a car for her personal use. Then
Then she can't.
then she can't. Then she can't. So it depends on the what? It depends on the facts of the case. එතකොට facts අනුව තමයි ඒක තීරණය වෙන්නේ. We have to consider whether what happened to that sold money. If she again incurred that sold money in the business, then she can deduct that expenditure. But she incurred that sold money for personal use, then she can't deduct that expenditure. ඔන්න ඔය විදිහට තමයි අපි හිතන්න ඕනේ වියදමක් තිබුණොත් whether we can deduct that expenditure or not. Okay, very good. Hari. Now we can move to the next deduction rule. This is the deduction for trading stocks. So, section 13 is applicable. Deduction of trading stock. What is the meaning of trading stock? What is the meaning of a trading stock? Who knows? What is the trading stock? For the trading stock, we have a definition under section 195. දැන් ඔයගොල්ලෝ මම දාන්න trading stock එකම තමයි, but we have a specific definition in section 195. It says trading stock means assets owned by a person that are sold or intended to be sold in the ordinary course of a business of the person, or work in progress on such assets, inventories of materials to be incorporated into such assets and consumable stores. So, in simply way, what is the trading stock? Trading stock means an asset that are sold or intended to be sold in the ordinary course of a business. අපි සරලවම දන්නවා trading stock එකක් කියන්නේ අපි ළඟ තියෙන භාණ්ඩ තොගය. stock එක. trading stock එක accounts කරපු අය නම් දන්නවා trading stock කියන එක අන්න ඒකම තමයි. එතකොට අපි ළඟ තියෙන භාණ්ඩ තොගය ගැන තමයි now we are talking about. So, and it says the definition of capital assets and depreciable assets excludes trading stock. That means the trading stock means that are sold or intend to be sold in the ordinary course of business, but it excludes capital assets and depreciable assets. I will explain the definitions of capital assets and depreciable assets later. So up to now, you should know what is trading stock. එතකොට විකුණන්න අපි ළඟ තියෙන හරි විකුණපු හරි භාණ්ඩ තොගය. That means if this person is a service provider, එයාට තියෙනවද trading stock එක? If our taxpayer is a service provider, does he has a trading stock? තියෙනවද එහෙම කෙනෙකුට? trading stock එකක් තියෙනවද? service provider කෙනෙකුට? consultant, engineer, doctor, teacher, ඒගොල්ලන්ට තියෙනවද trading stock එක? No. Only the person who sells, who buying and who is engaging in buying and selling or manufacturing and selling, that kind of persons have trading stocks. So, what does this mean? Allowance for trading stock. Why do we have this kind of allowance? No. Yes. Answer is correct. Okay. Then, why do we have to grant allowance for trading stock? What is the purpose of giving this kind of deduction? What is the purpose? Can you tell me? What is the purpose? These are the expenses we are going to deduct in calculating our assessable income. So, now we are talking about the trading stock. So, what is the purpose of deducting this trading stock? Okay, let's go to next slide. The allowance shall be calculated as. After that, you can understand what is the meaning of trading stock. So, trading stock means that are sold or intend to be sold in the ordinary course of business. So, the next one, this is with regard to the allowance for trading stock. So, here the way of calculating this allowance, it says the allowance shall be calculated as the opening value of trading stock of the business for the year of assessment. That means opening value plus expenses incurred by the person during the year that are included in the cost of trading stock of the business. That means this is B means what? B means purchases. Then less the closing value of trading stock of the business for the year. If you studied accountancy, you should know what is this. Here is, this is the method of calculating this allowance. It says opening value, then add purchases, then we deduct closing stock. So what is the answer? Opening stock plus purchases minus closing stock. What is the answer? මේ විදිහට calculate කරාම අපිට මොකක්ද දෙන්නේ? Then this is the way of calculating the allowance. So what is this? මේ වගේ calculate කරපු එකක් මොකක්ද තියෙන්නේ?
Cost
What
of
is
goods sold. Cost of goods sold, madam.
Yes, cost of sales. This is the cost of sales. So what is this allowance? Allowance for trading stocks means allowance for cost of sales. Yes, cost of sales. Munavira. Yes, Munavira. It is correct. Cost of sales. So what is the purpose of deducting cost of sales? Why do we deduct? Why do we grant this allowance for cost of sales? ඇයි අපි මෙහෙම එකක් අඩු කරන්න දෙන්නේ?
Because it's directly connected to the revenue generation, madam.
Yes, directly connected to the revenue generation. And the other reason? For the calculation of business income, actually this is only applicable for the business. This is applicable for the business income. Section 13 is applicable only for the business income. In this case, here you can see when we are including items to the business income, here we included sales value. මතකයිනේ? Consideration in respect of this trading stocks. එහෙමනේ අපේ තිබුණේ. මතකයිනේ මම කිව්වා I told you to, I explained you about the items that we have to include in calculating the business income. At that time, we included sales value. Assessable income means this is like a gain, profit. So if we consider sales value as income, then to calculate the gain, definitely we have to deduct cost of sales. නේද? අපි මෙතන ආදායමට ගත්තනම්, income එකට ගත්තනම් sales value එක profit එක හොයන්න, general gross profit එක හොයන්න පළවෙනියෙන්ම we deduct cost of sales. So to grant legality to deduct that cost of that expenditure, we have given this section 30. So මෙන්න මේ section එක අපිට දීලා තියෙන්නේ ඒකයි. එතකොට අපිට පුළුවන් මේ section 13 යටතේ අඩු කරන්න cost of sale. So this is the calculation method of that cost of sales. After deducting, we can calculate the assessable income. So now we know two expenses that we can deduct when we are calculating the assessable income. First one is interest. The second one is cost of sales. Okay. Now we can move to the next slide. We know 12 and 13. Now this is with regard to the repair and improvements. So section 14 is applicable for repair and improvements. It says expenses for the repair or improvement of depreciable asset, not the all assets in the company or a businessman. There may be lot of assets. Up to now, we studied about the trading stock. That is also a part of. So now we are talking about depreciable assets. If we are incurring some expenditure for improvement of a depreciable asset, then we have section 14 to check the amount of the expenses incurred in respect of the repair or improvement, a depreciable asset. We have to apply section 4, determine the amount of deduct amount. So it says expenses for improvement of depreciable assets shall be deducted irrespective of whether they are of a capital nature or not. Remember, under section, when we are considering the section 11, in that under section 11, we couldn't deduct expenditure. But under section 14, we can deduct capital nature expenditure. We incur expenses for repair and improvement of a depreciable. එතකොට depreciable asset එකක් වෙන්න ඕන. ඒ depreciable asset එක improvement expense එකක් කරනවා නම් not only the revenue nature capital nature expenses also can be deducted. There is a restriction. That means the restriction of improvements granted for any year of assessment from April 1st, 2021, and with respect to a depreciation of a person. If it is a building or similar depreciable assets, it should be restricted 50% of the written down value of the asset at the previous year, and in all other cases, we can deduct 20% of the written down value of the asset at the end of the previous year. That means we can incur expenses for the assets, depreciable as in this case for the purpose of this, that depreciable assets divided into two. One, depreciable assets classified under class 4. Depreciable asset classification is provided under schedule 4 of the Act. According to that schedule, we have six classes. Repair expenses incurred only for the class 4, then restriction is 5%. If this repair or improvement is done, the classes other than class 4, the restriction is 20%. Restriction is on what? 12% is on what? On the written down value of the end of the previous year. So what we have to do? After this restriction, definitely there will be a excess expense. That expense for which a deduction is not allowed shall be depreciation basis of that asset. මෙතන ලොකු කතාදරම ගොඩාක් මං කිව්වා. මේවා තේරෙන්නත් පුළුවන් නැති වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. පුංචි කතාවක් කියන්න එක මම සිංහලෙන් කියන්න. ඒතර දැන් year of assessment 2023 ඔයගොල්ලන්ට කරන නිසා තමයි මෙන්න මේ විදිහේ ප්‍රොවිෂන් එකක් ඔයගොල්ලන්ට හදා. එතන කියනවා, in this section it says, commencing from 2021 කියලා. එතන මීට කලින් තිබුණේ මීට වඩා වෙනස් තත්ත්වයක්. ඊට කලින් අපිට repair and improvements කියන දෙකටම මෙන්න මේ වගේ limits දාන්න වුණා. නමුත් අපිට මෙන්න මේ date එකෙන් පස්සේ මේ limit එක දාන්නේ improve විතරයි. Here you can see expenses for the repair and තමයි කතා කරන්නේ. එතකොට repair වියදමක් හරි improvement වියදමක් හරි තිබුණා. මෙන්න මේ දිනියට කලින් ඔයගොල්ලෝ ගණන් හැදුවා නම් වියදමටයි improvement වියදමටයි කියන දෙකටම මෙන්න එක දාලා මේ කියන ප්‍රමාණය විතරයි අඩු කරන්න ඉඩ දෙන්නේ. excess එකක් තිබුණොත් ඒක ගෙනහිල්ලා depreciation දෙන්න එක නිසා වියදමක් විදිහට අඩු කරන්න දෙන්නේ නැහැ. එතකොට that provision was amended in the 2021 Amendment Act. Therefore, now assessment that you have for your examination is 23. So, for that year of assessment, you have to restrict only the improvement expenses, not the repair expenses. හරිද? එතකොට මෙන්න මේ නීති දැන් ඕගොල්ලන්ට තියෙනවා. එතකොට මෙතන ඕගොල්ලෝ සමහරලාට මේ ගැන ටිකක් හරි දන්න කෙනෙක් කලින් පරණ තක්සේරු වර්ෂවල previous years of assessment වලට to restrict both repair and improvement expenses. But for the year of assessment 22-23, you have to restrict only the expenses in the improvements. So we have you a definition for the improvement because it is very difficult to draw a line in between repair and improvements. Repair කිව්වත් improvements කිව්වත් හරි අමාරුයි line මැදින් ඉරක් ගන්න. මේව මේ જાති මේව දෙමි જાති කියලා වෙන් කරනවා. Therefore, we have a definition for the term improvement. So improvement, the expenditure incurred by a person to make or alterations to a depreciable asset. So, if we incur expenditure to enhance the value of such asset, by how? To enhance the value of such asset by additioning or alteration, then it is a kind of an, but it excludes the expenditure incurred to maintain, repair depreciable asset, which temporarily enhances the value of such asset. Because if it is repair or improvement, then irrespective of their capital nature or not, we can grant deduction. Only for the improvement part, the total amount incurred during of assessment can't be deducted. There is a restriction, but the repair part can be allowed as a deduction. The ප්‍රශ්නයක් තියෙනවා නම් අහන්න. ප්‍රශ්න නැද්ද? හොඳටම තේරුණා. Okay.
Madam.
Yes.
Now, madam, now when we say improvement, basically we'll say that is a capital nature.
Yes.
So in that case, won't it affect the capital allowance?
No. If it is an improvement, we have to apply section 14. It says the most specific be applied. If it is an improvement, since there is a for the improvement, we have to apply section 14, not the section 16. But for the amounts that we are not allowed during that year of assessment, that is the amount excess, that part should be added to the depreciation basis and we can give capital allowances only for that undeducted part.
Ah,
Okay?
okay, madam. In the sense, madam, now we'll say 100, we have bought some asset for 10,000, and if say 80,000, say 20% of that is, say, we'll say 4,000 is, say 10,000, 20%, 2,000 is okay. We can basically claim as improvement 20. Balance 8,000, we can add and claim capital allowance. Is it, madam?
Yes, yes. We have to add it to the depreciation basis and run capital allowances from the next year of assessment. This year of assessment, we can give improvement expenditure, but from the assessment, we can grant not the improvement cost, but as capital allowances. හරිද? මේක තේරුණාද? ඔයාට නම් තේරුණා වගේ හරි. ඔයාට තේරිලා. අනිත් අයට තේරුණාද? තේරුණාද? තව කවුරු හරි එක්කෙනෙක් දෙන්නෙක් කියන්න බලන්න තේරුණාද කියලා. We can move to the example, then understand. So this is also another amendment we made during the year of assessment 20 with effect from April 1st, 2022. That means for the 22-23 year of assessment, this part is also applicable. This make apply when mama example එක කියලා ඉවර වෙලා ඔයගලන්ට කියලා දෙන්න. Actually, this is applicable for your year of assessment, but capital allowances, I'll explain it later. මොකද ඒක දැම්ම කිව්වොත් ඔයගලන්ට තේරෙන්නේ. Therefore, I will explain that. Let's move to an example. This is an example for the. So, this is a company R. It runs a manufacturing business. During the following years of assessments, it incurs expenses. That means, even though you are in this period, that 22-23 period, you should know previous repairs done. Because for the grant of that capital allowances and for the improvements, you know the repairs and improvements done up to this year of assessment. එහෙම කියන්නේ ඇයි? ඒතර අපි මේක පාවිච්චි කරලා මේ ගාන හදාගෙන යනවා. තේරෙනවා කොහොමද මේක එන්නේ කියලා. So in the year of assessment 18, they purchased a new machine. And the next important thing you should know, we can apply this section 14 only to the assets purchased after 2018 April 1st. What is the reason for that? Because that is the date of that this new act effected. එතකොට අලුත් act එක උනේ 2018යි 4යි 1 That means from the year of assessment 18. Therefore, this rule is for an asset only purchased after April 1st, 2018. Assets purchased prior to this period is not entitled for the application section 14. They have to apply previous act for the repairs and improvements, previous years for the repairs and improvements of the assets purchased prior to this period. හරිද? පරණ purchase කරපු assets වලට මේ section එක apply වෙන්නේ නැහැ. අදාළ වෙන්නේ පරණ පනත. ඒතර මේ පනත අදාළ වෙන්නේ මේ දිනේට කරපු assets වලට. That is why I have taken this example that they purchased this asset during the year of assessment for 2 million. In the 18-19, improvements to the machine, they incurred 1,000. In the 19-20, repairs and improvements, 300,000. In the 2021, repairs and improvements, 100,000. 21-22, repair 200 and 150. 22-23, repair 100 and improvements. Since the machine is under class 3, that means we have to select the suitable percentage for the rest. Here it says 5% or 10%. Only for the assets classified under class 4 is applicable rate for the assets is applicable rate. In all other cases applicable percentage is 20%. Here 4 means buildings, structures and similar depreciable assets. මෙතන similar කිව්වා ගොඩනැගිල්ල structure එකක් හරි ඒ જાතියව විතරයි. මේ ගන්න බෑ machine. මොකද ඒක similar නෑනේ මේවට. අපි law එකේ කතා කරනකොට කිව්වොත් මේ කියන ඒවට similar වෙන්න ඕන. මෙතන machine එකක්, vehicle එකක්, building එකක්, structure එකක්, partition එකක් අන්න ඒව විතරයි දාන්නේ. මේකට සමානව දාන්න. And if it is not if the asset cannot be categorized under this class for all other cases, applicable rate is 20%. We are talking about a machine. So, applicable rate is 20%. මොකද මේක building එකක් නෙවෙයිනේ. Therefore, applicable rate is 20% of the depreciation basis of the machine at the end of the previous year. එතකොට මෙතන මම දාලම තියෙනවා විශේෂ ඉඳලා repair expenses can be deducted in full කියලා. That means without restriction. That is why I highlighted it in red color. Okay. Let's go calculation. Okay. You can do one by one. 1 year of assessment and the next year of assessment like that. Now we are in year of assessment 18-19. So machine for 2 million and the same year of assessment the improvement that is 100,000. It can be. So written down value at the beginning of the year. Do we have a written down value at the beginning? What is the written down value? Written down value means after deducting the depreciation part. That means cost, capital allowances or depreciation. Then we will have value. If we purchase that in the year of assessment, we do not have down value at the beginning. හරිනේ. අපි ගත්ත asset එක ඇතුළදී නම් opening balance එකක් අපිට නැහැ. Then the capital allowance. Capital allowance is the rates under 4th schedule and applicable provision is section 16. Section 16 කතා කරනකොට capital allowances ගැන ඔයගොල්ලෝ දැනගමු. Up to then you should know the applicable period for allowances, relevant period for a machine, that is 5 years. Means we can divide this by 5. 2 million is the cost and we can depreciate this 2 million from 5 years. Therefore, I divided that by 5. The allowance is 400,000. Then we incurred 100,000. Here, 100,000. So, we can apply our formula to check, to determine allowable deduction and the not allowable deduction. Do we calculate? The formula is down value of the previous year, 20% of the written the previous year. So in this case, for a purchased in the year of assessment 18-19, that asset hasn't a previous year. Previous year එකක් නෑනේ යාට. Purchase කරේම මේ අවුරුද්දෙන්. Therefore, there is no previous year. The previous year එකක් නැත්තම් we can't apply that formula because formula is 20% of the previous year written down value. So we have a previous year written down value. Therefore, we cannot apply that and make a purchase කරපු අවුරුද්ද නිසා what we have We cannot apply that rate. Therefore, we can't allow any amount. Here, they incur repair 100,000, but since we cannot apply this formula, we can't allow any amount. I said it, not allowed. If not allowed, what we have to do? We can add this not allowed amount into the depreciation basis of the asset. Depreciation basis means after deduction of the capital allowances relevant for that year. That means cost minus capital allowances, that is the written down value. Written down value depreciation basis. So written down value is 1.6 million. That amount we can add that 100,000. Then we can consider the aggregate of these two as a beginning written down value of the year of assessment 1920. අපි දැන් මෙතන කතා කරන්නේ එක machine එකක් ගැන. එක purchase කරේ 1819 year of assessment එකේ. එතකොට මේ allowance එක 100,000 තිබුණා. මෙයා incur කරා. But we can't allow that 100,000 as a deduction because we do not previous written down value. Therefore, we cannot apply the formula. It says no. What we have to do, we have to add that part, disallowed part, to the written down value of the year. Then we have to go to the next year of. In this case, in the year of assessment, 1920, they incurred repair and improvements, that is 350. So, 370,000. It is here. So now we have depreciation amount, that value we have. So we can deduct it from 4 years. We have 5 years to depreciate this 2 million. So we divide it by 4 years. The depreciation portion for the year of assessment 1920 is 405,000. Now we are going to check whether the repair expenses of 370,000 is allowable as a deduction or not. Now we can apply formula. Formula is 20% of the year written down value. So 20% of the previous end of the written down value at the end of the year of assessment is 1,700. We can multiply by 1,700 is 20%. Then we have amount that is 340,000. But we incur 170,000. Only the allowable amount is 300,000. So we have an amount that is 30,000. 1,000 is the amount that is not allowed as a deduction in the year of assessment 1920. So what we have to do, this not allowed amount should be add to the current year depreciation amount, not the previous year depreciation amount, but the current year written down value. So current year written down value means after deducting this 425,000 from 1,700,000. That is 1,275,000. We can add that undeducted amount 30,000 to here. So the total amount will be the opening written down value of this asset. Then again we have to go to the calculation formula. The incurred amount is 1,000. So we have to check the allowable amount. Write 20% to the previous written down value, that is 1.3 million. the allowable amount is 261,000. Incurred amount is 200,000. Allowable amount is 260,000. Therefore, we can allow incurred amount. මෙතන වැඩි වුණා කියලා මේක දෙන්නේ නැහැ. අපි දෙන්නේ හැම වෙලාවෙම දරපු වීදෙම තමයි. So if it is 200, we can grant. Then not allow කරන කොටසක් නැහැ. So the value is 870. It will be 170 for the year of assessment 21-22. Then in that year of assessment 21-22, we can grant 200 total amount as a මෙතනට වෙනකම් පේනවා ඔයගලන්ට මම මේ මුළු ගානම ගෙරිච්ච restriction. Repair and improvements කියන එක එකට අරගෙන දෙකම ගෙරිච්චා. But from the assessment 21-22, we have to separately identify amount for the repair or and amount for the improvement. Because applicable provisions for repair and improvements are different. For the repair expenditure, total amount can be allowed as a irrespective of whether they are capital nature or revenue nature. But for the improvement part, we can't do like we have to restrict this 150 amount using previous formula. Here now we have only 150. Repairs are not included here. So we have to apply the rate 20% of the previous written down value. That is 24,000. But the incurred amount is lesser than the, so that lesser amount can be allowed as a deduction. Then we only 435 as end of the written down value. Consider it here. Now, when we are granting the capital allowances relevant for this period, we can, now we have 5 years, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, we can divide it by 1. Because make it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Therefore, we can divide it by 1. So, the allowable capital allowances for this period is 430. And the repair, not the repair, but improvements incurred is 90,000. Here, 90,000. Therefore, we can restrict that 90,000. So, we can apply 24% for the previous written down value. Allowable amount is 87,000. So, we can allow only 87,000. Balance 3,000 is not allowable as a deduction. Then, what will happen? That can be added to the written down of the period. So there is no written down. Total amount can be granted as a capital allowance. So only 3,000 is there. The main 3,000 has been made repair taking. High Yanama 23-24 year of assessment. Up to now, do you have questions? ප්‍රශ්න තියෙන කට්ටිය අහන්නකෝ. මේක දන්නේ නැතුව ඉස්සරහට යන්න බෑ. කට්ටිය ඉන්නවද? කෙනෙක් අහගෙන ඉන්නවද?
Yes, madam.
අද හරි පාළුයි නේද? අද කට්ටියගේ සද්දයක් නැහැ. මේක ඔන් කරලා කට්ටිය වෙන වැඩද දන්නෙත් නැහැ. ඔක්කොම ඉන්න?
Yes, madam.
Yes?
Yes.
මුණ පේන්නේ නැහැනේ. හරි. නේද? හරි. තේරුණාද? තේරුන්නේ නැද්ද? Understood? Yes, yes. ඔක්කොම yes කියලා දාලා තියෙනවා. හරි. දෙන්නේ yes කියලා. හොඳයි. ලලන්ත, ලක්මාල්, yes, yes, yes. Hari, tawai danawa yes කියලා. Hari, very good. If they sell the assets 22, 23, what about capital allowance? Okay, we will discuss it later when we are doing our section, that is section 16, because it is relevant for that. Selling depreciable assets is applicable for section 16. 16 වෙනි වගන්තිය තමයි අදාළ වෙන්නේ ඒකට. We can discuss it later. Because if we sold it, hereafter no repair allowances. And still discussing about the repair and improvement expenses. When we are incurring that expense, then we have to allow. Sold it, it is not necessary to calculate. Okay? Yes. Okay. Then I am going to tell you one important thing. What you mean by this? Here, මොකක්ද ඔයගලන්ට තේරෙන්නේ from here? Diminishing මේ පේනවා. ටික written down value එක නැති වෙයි. දැන් මෙහෙම ගිහලා මොකද්ද වෙන්නේ? තව ටිකක් ඉස්සරහට යන්න. Written down value can be 0. Then what will happen? After that, if this written down value is 0, then we can't apply that rate. Why? If we apply 20% on the amount 0, that means we can't give any amount as a deduction, even though they have incurred. ඒක පැහැදිලි නේද? දැන් මේක යන විදිහට අපිට තේරෙනවනේ නේ. මෙහෙම ඉස්සරහට written down value එක 0 වුණාම අපිට මෙයාට ගාණක් දෙන්න බැරි වෙනවා. But even though the written down value is 0, මොකද හිතන්නේ ඔයගොල්ලෝ repair expenses නොදරයිද? machine එක හරි capital asset එක වැඩ කරන්න බැරි තරමට condemn වෙනකම් මේ පාවිච්චි කරනවා නේ. අවුරුදු 5යිද machine එකක් තියෙන්නේ. But normally we grant allowances only for 5 years. අවුරුදු 5කින් අපි share කරලා ඉවර කරනවා. But 5, not only 5 years, but 10 to 12 years, they can use that asset. So they can incur expenses for repair and improvements. කල්යන්න තමයි repair improvements වැඩි වෙන්නේ. So after getting this written down values, even though they incur expenses for repair, especially improvements, because now the repair total deduction, but the improvements, they can't deduct any amount as an improvement cost. නේද? මේක 0 වෙච්ච වෙලාව බිඳුවේ වටිනාකමක් 120න් වැඩි කරාම මෙතන එන්නේ කීයද? බිඳුවයි. එහෙනම් කීයක්වත් දෙන්න. That is why we have included this amendment in the 2020. It says, in the event of the written down value is 0 depreciable asset, the deduction for improvement deducted in equal amounts apportioned over 12 years assessment for a class 4 depreciable asset. Class 4 means if it is a, then the improvement expenses after the written down value is 0, they can deduct that expenditure for 12 years of asset. If it is other than class 4 asset, then that expenditure can be deducted for 3 years. නිශංක ඕනෙලු ඉන්ටර්වල් එක. හරි. මටත් මහන්සි. It is okay. How many minutes do you want an interval? 5, 10? Nishanka, how many minutes? 10. Okay. It is 8:10, 8:40, we can start. Now I explain about the repair improvement expenses. Actually, this example 2 is relevant for the repair and improvements made by the lessee. Lessee means a person who rent a building. They can කුලියට ගත්. So, if a person who is lessee make the repair or improvements for a operate to a asset, then what will be the tax treatment? I will explain this part after we studying that section 16, because until then you do not have that. Therefore, after section 16, I will explain this part. The research and development expenses. හරි ඊට කලින් මට කියන්නේ හැම දිනාටම තේරුණා නේද section 14? Section 14 තේරුණානේ හැම දිනාටම ප්‍රශ්නයක් තියෙනවා නම් අහන්න. Okay, then section 15, that is research and development expenses and agriculture expenses. If a company or an taxpayer, a person incurs expenses in relation to research expenses or agricultural startup expenses, irrespective of whether they are of a capital nature. Such expenses can be deducted when they are calculating their business income. That means if there is a research or development or agricultural expenses, that can be deducted. So what is the meaning of research and development expenses? ඔගොල්ලෝ දන්නවා ඇති ඔයගොල්ලන්ගේ එතනවල research and development expenses incur කරනවා. So we have a definition for that. All research and development expenses the accountant according to the accounting standard is not considered for the tax purposes because we have a specific definition for that term, research development. That means if a person carrying on any scientific, industrial, agriculture, any other research for the upgrading of the person's business through any institution in Sri Lanka. That means that research should be done through any institution in Sri Lanka. Or for any innovation or research relating to high value agricultural products. Innovation or research relating to high value agricultural products by the person or through any research institution. That means there are two kinds of research. One is done by the person and the other are done by other research institutions. So to upgrade of that person's business and innovation and research relating to high value agricultural products. If a company or taxpayer incurs expenses in relation to research and development for their businesses, that expenses can be deducted. Or the process of developing the person's business and business products or process. Not only this research, but if there is of developing the person's business and improving their products or also, that kind of expenses also can be deducted, which shall be beneficial to Sri Lanka, but shall expenses incurred that are otherwise included in the cost of an asset under this act. That means the capital nature expenses also can be allowed as a deduction, but if that amount that is to purchase an asset, and if that asset, the cost of that asset is considered in any other way in this act, that kind of assets are not allowed as a deduction under section 14. Section 15 කියන්නේ වෙනත් මේ අපේ වෙනත් වෙනත් මොකද දැන් මෙතන මේ section එකේදී revenue nature, capital nature ඕනෑම වියදමක් අඩු කරන්න දෙනවා if we incur in respect of the research and එතකොට research and development කියලා මේ දරණ එකේදී assets මෙයා පර්චේස් මේ asset එක capital allowance ගන්න හරි වෙන දෙයකට හරි වෙන තැනක consider වෙනවා නම් then this person can't deduct that expenditure under section 15. ඒක තමයි මෙතනින් මේ කියන්නේ. So agricultural expenses means expenses incurred by the person in up any land. That means agricultural startup prior to start their agricultural business, they have to opening up their lands, for animal husbandry. If they are going to engage in the business of land or animal husbandry, they have to open up that land. That expenses can be deducted under section 15. Not only that, cultivating the land and livestock, poultry or on land referred to in paragraph A or maintaining tank or ponds or preparation of any inland waters for the rearing of fish purchase of fish to be reared in such tank pond or inland waters. එතකොට මෙතනදී ඔයගලන්ට තේරෙනවා ඉතින් මෝද ඇති කරන මාළු ගැන අපි කතා කරන්නේ නැහැ. waters වල ඉන්න ඇතුලේ රට ඇතුලේ තියෙන කරන මාළු ගැන කතා කරන්නේ. අන්න ඒ වගේ දෙයක් කරන්න වියදමක් we consider that kind of expenses as agricultural starts and allowed to be deducted under section 50. And for this purpose, there is an additional deduction means not only the expenses incurred, in addition to that actually incurred amount, another deduction also allowed, we called it additional deduction. In this case, this additional deduction is 100% of the total amount deducted under section 15. Again, section 15 deduct කරන්න කතා කරගත්තු වේදම වගේ 100%ක් additional deduction එකක් දෙනවා. Why? What is the reason of this? Actually, from the tax, what we can do? Encourage some businesses and we can discourage some businesses. As well, we can encourage or discourage some expenses through policies. I think you all of that if we want to encourage some businesses, what we do, we give tax concessions. If we lower tax lower rates and lot of concessions. And to discourage some businesses, what we can increase our tax rates and we can impose lot of tax, lot of things. We can disallow lot of expenditure kind of businesses. So in this case, to encourage research among the business people, what we have introduced an additional reduction. අපි ඇත්තටම 100ක් නම් දැරුවේ තව 100ක් කරගන්න දෙනවා. What is the purpose? To encourage research and development among businessmen. To take the tax advantage, they incur expenses for research. That is very important for their businesses. Sri Lankan businessmen not incur expenses for research. ඒක තමයි මේකේ හේතුව උනේ. වැඩිපුර research and development වියදම් ඒගොල්ලෝ වියදම් කරවන්න තමයි additional deduction එකක් දීලා තියෙන්නේ. Okay. Then the next, marketing and communication expenses, that is under 15A. For this section 15, we have introduced in the new in the number in the amendment of section 2021 amendment, we introduced these new expenses. This is communication expenses. We call it MarCom expenditure. Section 15A. According to this section, for any year of assessment commencing on or after April 1st, 2021, since we is in the 2021 Amendment Act, this is applicable from the 21-22. In calculating a person from a business, that means this expenses is entitled on the business. Marketing and communication expenses, such person in the production of income during the year of assessment shall be irrespective of whether they are of a capital nature or not. Hence, if they have incurred any expenses relevant for the MarCom, then whether they are capital nature or no nature, irrespective of that, grant as a deduction. So what are the MarCom expenses? For this, we have given a definition. For the marketing and communication, we have given a definition. According to this definition, Marcom expenses or marketing and communication expense means expense carrying out a market research by such person or institution in Sri Lanka on his behalf. That means research can be done by that person or it can be done through any other institution. If incur some expenses in relation to market research, that market research expenses can be under section 15A. Then the development or production of marketing, advertising and communication campaign. That is a campaign. Development or production of, that is a marketing campaign, advertising campaign or a communication campaign to develop or production of their, that means development of campaigns, marketing campaign, advertising campaign or tele campaigns. If that campaign is developed or produced by a company or a person in Sri Lanka, then that expenditure can be deducted under Marcom expense. What is the difference between under these sections and main deduction rule? That means under section 11. The difference is under section 11, we cannot deduct capital nature expenses, but if we deduct the expenditure under Marcom under section 15A, they can deduct nature expenses too. That is the to a person if they can deduct the expenses under these specific provisions. The next Marcom expense is advertising mainstream media or social media, including radio, print or as outdoor advertising. You can advertisement. That advertisement can be revenue nature or capital nature. Sometimes some advertisements are only for few months. But some advertisements we can see through several, not only for 1 year, but for several years. So that kind of advertisements are capital nature advertisements. And some advertisements are revenue advertisements. If it is a capital nature advertisement, the expenses in that kind of advertising, that expenditure can be deducted under section 15. The next one is product launches. So campaign activity carried out by such person or by any local institution. And see this very important wordings. Most of the most of the items that means A, B, and E. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items in this part. So, out of these 5, this one should be carried out in Sri Lanka, and this one also should be carried out in Sri Lanka, and the last one also should be carried out by a local in Sri Lanka. That means you can see that most of these advertisements we carry out by Sri Lankan institutions, local institutions. That this provision is mainly introduced to encourage the to encourage advertising for, and to encourage persons to advertise their products through their local institution. Local institutions වල advertising encourage කිරීම තමයි මේ ආරම්භන උනේ. So if they are preparing, if they are producing through a company or an institution in Sri Lanka, they are entitled for the deduction. Therefore, their research, market research, and all other activities to a street company, local company. So these are the communication expenses. So if they, irrespective of whether they are capital nature, we can deduct that kind of expenses. So not only this, like that research and development expenses, for marketing and communication expenses also has a special that is additional deduction is entitled for this marketing and communication expenses. Additional deduction එකක් මේකේ තියෙනවා. ඒ කියන්නේ prior to that they should be entitled for the deduction 15A. 15A එකේ යටතේ deduction එකකට entitled වෙන වියදමක් විතරයි additional deduction එකකට entitled. Therefore, if there is an expense the advertisement, first of all, we have to check whether that expense is allowable as a deduction under section 15A. Section 15A වලට entitled ද කියලා බලන්න ඕන. Then that expense is entitled for the additional deduction. But there is a cap, there are some conditions to claim this additional. That institution should fulfill criteria. So there are several criteria. One is the payment shall be made to a person who is not an associate person of the taxpayer. That means if we introduce this additional deduction or specific session, what they do is they try to give these to produce these items to their associate persons. ඒ කියන්නේ මොකක්ද? මොකද්ද කරන්නේ taxpayers ලා? taxpayers ලාට දුන්නාම සහනයක් ඔයාට ලක්ෂයක් දරුවා නම් ලක්ෂ දෙකක් ඔයාට අඩු කරගන්න පුළුවන් කියලා කිව්වොත් එයා මොකද? එයාගේ associate කෙනෙක් ලව්ව මේක හදවනවා. මොකද මෙතන carried out by such person or any other local institution. එතකොට හැමතිස්සෙම තමන් හෝ වෙන කෙනෙක් හදුවා කියන්නේ. එතකොට මේ local විදිහට අනිත් අය කරන්නේ මොකද්ද? ඒගොල්ලෝ තමන්ගේ associate කෙනෙක් through කරනවා. එතකොට 50000කට හදපු දේ ලක්ෂයට හැදුවා කියලා ඒගොල්ලන්ට පෙන්නන්න. Then obtain another 100% additional tax. එතකොට අන්න ඒක නවත්වීමක් තමයි මේ condition එකෙන් කරේ. If they can make that they can produce their own advertisement or they can do another institution, but that institution should not be an associate of this person. එතකොට ඒ කියන්නේ associate කෙනෙක් ලව්වා කරන්න. The next condition is internal marketing expenses of marketing staff, expenditure on maintaining and internal marketing, expenditure on corporate social responsibility initiatives, and all expenses shall not be considered for the purpose of the additional deduction. That means this kind of expenses they can claim under pricing, but that kind of expenses are not allowed for the internal deduction. That means internal marketing expenses. Salaries of marketing staff, expenditure on maintaining internal marketing department, expenditure on corporate CSR, expenditure on CSR initiatives, and foreign travel expenses will not be considered for the purpose of this additional deduction. That is the second condition. Then the next condition is expenditure shall be attributable to goods and services with 65% of low. That means to claim that 100% additional deduction, the goods services relevant for that advertisement is should have 65% of low commission. The mode of calculation of which shall be specified by the commissioner. That means if it is a product manufactured in Sri Lanka or if it is a service provided with a 65% of local value addition, then the advertisement is entitled for the value addition. මොකද්ද මේකෙන් කියන්නේ? අපි මොකක් හරි භාණ්ඩයක් හෝ සේවාවකට ඇඩ්වර්ටයිස්මන්ට් එකක් හදනවා. මේ හදන ඇඩ්වර්ටයිස්මන්ට් එකට section 15 යටතේ we deduct expenses. අපි මේ ඇඩ්වර්ටයිස්මන්ට් එක වෙනුවෙන් දරන අපිට we can deduct under section 15A. Advertisement expenses can. In addition to that deduction under section 15, that person can deduct another 100%. That is 100% in respect of that additional deduction. Well, again, අපි හිතමු සබන් කෑල්ලක් කියලා. සබන් කෑල්ලක් තියෙනවා. මේ ඇඩ්වර්ටයිස්මන්ට් එකක් හදලා දාන්න. මේ ඇඩ්වර්ටයිස්මන්ට් එක හදන්න තියෙවි. ඊට පස්සේ මේ සබන් කෑල්ල හදන්න ගිය ඇඩ්වර්ටයිස්මන්ට් එකට ගියා නම් ලක්ෂයක්. මේ ලක්ෂයට අමතරව තව ලක්ෂයක් මෙයාට ඩිඩක්ෂන් එකක් ගන්න පුළුවන්. හැබැයි අර සයිලට තියෙන්න ඕනේ ලෝකල් වැලියු ඇඩිෂන් එක 65%. ඒ මොකද ලෝකල් කියන්නේ? ලංකාව ඇතුලේදී ඒ සබන් කැටයට හගේ වැලියු ඇඩිෂන් එකක් වෙලා තියෙනවා. මේකේ මොකද්ද කරේ? පිට අඩුවට කරන ඇඩ්වර්ටයිස්මන්ට් එකට මේ වැලියු ඇඩිෂන් එක දෙන්නේ නෙමෙයි ඇඩිෂනල් ඩිඩක්ෂන් දෙන්නේ නැහැ කියන්නේ. සමහර භාණ්ඩ තියෙනවා සම්පූර්ණයෙන්ම පිටරට හදලා ලංකාවේ කරන්නේ පිට කවරේ විතරයි දාන්නේ. එතකොට 100ට දශම ගාන. එතකොට මේ භාණ්ඩෙන්ම හැදෙන්නේ පිටරට. එහෙම ඒවට මේ 100% value addition එක මේ additional deduction එක දෙන්නේ නැහැ. එයාට පුළුවන් ඒ advertisement එකට අදාළ වියදම් 15A යටතේ ඉල්ලන්න but not entitled for the additional deduction. ඇතුලේදී ලංකාවට මෙයා පොඩි අමුද්‍රව්‍ය ටිකක් import කරලා that raw material they can produce a if that product has 65 addition, then that advertisement is entitled for the value addition. So how do we calculate that 165%? Of that 65%, Commissioner General has a guideline. According to that guideline, we calculate the value addition of that product. If there is a value addition of 65%, deduction can be allowed as a additional deduction for the deduction. Not only this condition, that is, this additional deduction shall not exceed 500,000. Shall not exceed 500,000 in any year of assessment. That means additional deduction means 100%. Percent means if it is 100% is 500, more than 500,000 expense is not allowed as a deduction. Then last one is the Commissioner General shall specify the requirement to record source documents and underlying documents for above purpose in addition to the requirements of other sections of this Act. That means calculate that 65% value addition and for the cap of this additional deduction of 500 of this additional deduction to determine the value, determine the doing this production of this advertisement, we require some documents to specify those. Require some documents. Therefore, Commissioner General can specify requirements. What are the documents you have to maintain? What are the records maintained? And everything should be formed by the Commissioner General. Then we can allow that valuation to that. Okay. For this purpose, to calculation of this 65%, we have a special gazette notification. We have already issued it. Actually, I forgot to send it to you, distribute it among you. Therefore, next week, I will share it with you. After that, I will explain requirements mentioned in that guideline, because without that guideline, I can't explain, because I couldn't, I forget to send it to you. Therefore, week, I will explain that guideline. So, do you have any questions regarding Marcom expenditure? You can ask now. ප්‍රශ්න තියෙනවද කාට හරි? හරි. ප්‍රශ්න නැත්නම් අපි section යමු. Section 16 is for the deduction of capital allowances and balancing allowances. So it is 9:10. We can't finish capital allowances section because we have another several minutes, but I just explain what is this. Next week, I will explain again. This is capital allowances and balancing allowances. Capital allowances means normally not allow expenses incurred for the fixed asset as a deduction under section 11, because those assets are considered as capital. Those are not the assets. The benefit of assets is not only for few months, but more than 12 months period, we can use that asset. Therefore, we call them capital assets. Capital expenses, the expenses we incurred for that kind of assets, expenses, that capital expenses are not allowed in 11. Because of that, we have another deduct that kind of expenses. That is section 16. Section 16, we can deduct capital allowances. So we deduct capital allowances. We have schedule, and in the Inland Revenue Act, in the last of that Inland Revenue Act, we have 6 schedules. So second, 4th schedule and 6th schedule is provided for the capital allowances. And in this case, we can understand how these 4 schedules, we can understand how to calculate capital allowances and the balancing allowances. Balancing allowances means after realizing the depreciable asset, if we have a loss, we call it balance. Asset එකක් විකුණුවත් මොකද වෙන්නේ කියලා. asset එකක් විකුණුවාම වෙන දේ තමයි මෙතනින් මේ කතා කරන්නේ. If it is sold for a loss, then we called it balancing allowance. කියලා කියන්නේ asset එකක් අපි අඩු ගානකට depreciable assets ගැන තමයි මේකෙන් කතා කරන්නේ. Depreciable asset එකක් විකිනේ loss එකක් ආවනම් ඒ loss එක තමයි this part B වලින් we are talking. So that kind of 2 expenses can be deducted. 16. Actually, these are not the expenses, but the amount, other deductions. So capital allowances and balancing allowance can be deducted, shall be deducted in calculating the business income. හැම එකම shall be කියන්නේ විය යුතුයි කියලා. අඩු කළ යුතුයි. අපිට ඕන නම් අඩු කරන්න නැත්නම් නිකන් ඉන්න නෙවෙයි මෙහෙම එකක් මෙතනින් අඩු කළ යුතුයි කියලා කියන්නේ. Capital allowances can be and balancing allowances can be deducted under Section 16. What is the meaning of capital allowance? A person is entitled to claim capital allowances if such person is the depreciable asset and uses them at the end of assessment in the production of the person's income from a business. What is the meaning of this? There should be two conditions, and that two conditions should be fulfilled to deduct these capital allowances. What are the two conditions? That as the person should be of their depreciable asset, and that owner should use that asset at the end of the year of assessment. Then only capital allowances can be granted. ඒක තේරෙනවද? Person කෙනෙක් ඉන්නවා, that person තියෙන asset එකක්, the definition is there in the depreciable assets. I will explain what are the depreciable assets. So if there is, and if that person uses depreciable assets, then if that person is the owner of the depreciable, uses them at the end of the year of assessment. Production of the person's income from a business. That means depreciation, capital allowances is entirely only for the deduction under business source. If it is an investment source, capital allowances are not entitled. If it is a business source, from that business source, capital allowances can be. Then owner and user condition should be fulfilled, depreciation or capital allowances. So, capital allowances shall be calculated according to the straight line method. Straight line method means similar amounts in each. That means divided by from the period. For 5 years, we can depreciate depreciable years. That is the straight line method. Then full capital allowances will be granted for the year of acquisition. Year of acquisition. Full capital allowances will be granted for the year of acquisition. Sometimes we can purchase asset during the first day of that year of assessment, without considering that period, we can grant capital allowances. මොකක්ද කියන්නේ? Full capital allowances දෙන්න කියලා කියනවා මිලදී කියන්නේ if we purchase that asset during the year of 21-22, then for whole year, we can grant capital allowances. Sometimes we can purchase that in the we can purchase if suppose we purchase on 1st of April 2020 or 31st March 2022. Sometimes we use that asset only for a day during that year of assessment, or sometimes we use that during the whole year of assessment. Without considering that time period, we can grant total full capital allowances for assessment. එක තේරුණානේ? සමහරවිට එක දවසයි වෙන්න පුළුවන් තාක්ෂේරු වාර්ෂිකයටම පාවිච්චි කරේ. සමහරවිට මුළු අවුරුද්ද පුරාම පාවිච්චි කරගෙන ඉන්න පුළුවන්. කොහොම වුණත් proportionately නැතුව මුළු තාක්ෂේරු වාර්ෂිකයටම full amount එකම. But in contrast, capital will not be granted for the year of dispose. දැන් මෙහෙම එකක් act එකේ කියන්නේ නැහැ. But from this line we can determine here uses them at end of a year of assessment. Make a year of assessment end එකේ පාවිච්චි කරන්න තමයි දෙන්නේ. end එකේ පාවිච්චි කරන්න නැහැ. end එකේ කියන්නේ end means 31st March 20 any year. We can't use that during for if we sold it. අපි ඒක විකුණුවා නම් පාවිච්චි කරන්න බෑනේ. That is why we said capital allowances will not that for the year of disposal. Dispose කරපු අවුරුද්දට ඒක capital allowances දෙන්න එපා කියලා කියනවා. And capital allowance differ to a later year of assessment. That means we can give grant allowances for 5 years or 20 years. But we say that I am not going to claim capital allowances, but we will claim it from next year. කියලා කියන්න බෑ. We can't do. If we are the owner and if we use asset during the last year, that last year we have to start claiming capital allowances. We can't say, though I am the owner and I have used that, I'm not going to claim capital allowances for last year. I will claim capital allowances from next year. කියලා කියන්න බෑ. එයාට ඕන වෙලා කරා නම් definitely he has to deduct capital allowances. Shall not be granted in respect to road vehicles, other commercial vehicles. And road vehicles වලට capital allowances grant කරන්න road vehicles වලට grant කරන්නේ නැහැ. But other than vehicle, bus, minibus, goods vehicle or heavy specified trucks or trailer or motorcycle. මෙන්න මේවා හැර road vehicle වලට capital allowances දෙන්න වෙනවා. So what are the commercial vehicles? Commercial vehicles means loads of more than half a ton, carry more than 13 passengers, vehicle used in the transportation, vehicle used in a rental business. මෙතන චුට්ටක් බලන්න. මෙන්න මේ කියන වාහන ගත්තම මෙතනින් හැම වාහනයක්ම කවර් වෙලා කියලානේ තේරෙන්නේ. එතකොට හැම capital allowances දෙන්න පුළුවන්. හැබැයි මෙතනින් එක වෙලා නැහැ. අපි දැන් වාහන ගත්තොත් බස් තියෙනවා, ට්‍රක් තියෙනවා, heavy general purpose ඒවා තියෙනවා. මෙතනට ගියාම ලොරි තියෙනවා. බඩු ගෙනියන ඒවා, මිනිස්සු ගෙනියන ඒවා. මේ ලොරි මෙතන නැත්තේ. මෙතන නෑ සාමාන්‍ය පුද්ගල කාර් එකක්. traveling purpose පාවිච්චි කරන කාර් එකක් මෙතන නෑ. Therefore, a car used for the traveling purpose is not entitled to allowances. මෙතනින් අපි මේ ඔක්කොම capital allowances තියෙනවා කාර් එකකට හැර. Those main things to determine when we consider when we are deducting allowances. Okay, this is the table. This is the classification of the capital allowances. The year applicable for the capital grant for two classes. These are the classes. I think you can remember class assets under section 14. These are the class 4 assets. Class 4 assets means all other assets categorized under other 1, 2, 3, other 5 categories. There are 6 categories. So class 1 is 2 assets, class 3 assets, class 4 assets, 5 assets, and 6 assets. So if it is building, construction, or any other similar work, all others other situations, capital allowances, granting period years, But if it is an intangible asset means there are some assets, but we can't see, can't touch. That kind of assets, the actual life, useful life of the intangible asset, where the has an unidentified useful life, then 20%. The most suitable example for this intangible asset is leasing right. Leasing right, we can't see, we can't touch, it is intangible asset. So if we know the leasing period, we can depreciate that leasing right over that leasing period. If we don't know that, we can divide it by 20%. Sorry, 20 years. So the most suitable classification is leasing right. Then the milking machine, that should be for over 2 years. Okay. Depreciation ගැන මීට වඩා next week again 9:30 තුනා. I am very sorry, ඔයගලන්ට time නැති. Then if you have today's discussion, you can ask now. ප්‍රශ්න තියෙනවා නම් අහන්නකෝ. නැද්ද?
No question, madam.
Mhm.
We understood.
No, that means very clear.
Yes, ma'am.
හොඳටම clear ද හැම දිනාටම? හොඳටම clear ද හැමෝටම? මොනක්වත්ම ප්‍රශ්න?
Up to now, it's clear, madam. Thank you very
Ah.
much.
That's good. Okay, then we can stop today's session, so we can do the balance part in next week. Can stop now. Okay, then good night, all of you.
Good night, madam. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Right, madam. Thank you.